September 8th, 1900, a Saturday morning in Galveston, Texas. Children are playing on the beach. Families are out for morning strolls. The Gulf of Mexico is choppy, a little rougher than usual, but nothing alarming. By midnight that same day, 8,000 people were dead, maybe 12,000. Nobody knows for sure, because there was almost nobody left to count. This is the story of the Great Galveston Hurricane of 1900, the deadliest natural disaster in American history. A storm that erased an entire city in a single night. A catastrophe that the United States never saw coming and was completely powerless to stop. To understand the tragedy of Galveston, you first have to understand how magnificent this city was. In 1900, Galveston was the richest city in Texas and one of the most prosperous in the entire United States. It sat on a long, narrow barrier island off the Texas coast with a deep natural harbor that made it the busiest port in the South. In 1900, Galveston had a population of 37,000 people. It had the first electric lights in Texas, the first phone system, the first medical school. It was called the New York of the South. Grand Victorian mansions lined the streets. The city had opera houses, exclusive social clubs, and the finest restaurants between New Orleans and San Francisco. Galveston was Texas's crown jewel. But Galveston had one fatal flaw that everyone could see and almost nobody took seriously. The entire island sat just 8 feet above sea level at its highest point. It was surrounded on all sides by open water, and it had no seawall. In 1891, a young meteorologist named Isaac Klein published an article declaring it was impossible for a hurricane to cause serious damage to Galveston. He would spend the rest of his life haunted by those words. By Thursday, September 6th, a massive tropical storm had formed in the Gulf of Mexico. Weather Bureau telegrams were arriving in Galveston warning of a powerful storm approaching the Texas coast. But in 1900, there were no satellites, no radar, no aircraft to fly into the eye of the storm. Meteorologists were essentially guessing. Cuba's meteorologists had correctly predicted the storm's path days earlier, but the U.S. Weather Bureau ignored their warnings, partly due to professional rivalry and politics. That decision cost thousands of lives. On Saturday morning, September 8th, Isaac Klein, the very man who had said a hurricane couldn't hurt Galveston, rode his horse along the beach and watched the waves. They were enormous, crashing far inland. The surf was churning in a way he had never seen before. He turned his horse around and rode through the streets, warning families to flee to higher ground. But Galveston had no higher ground, and most people simply didn't believe it was that serious. By early afternoon on September 8th, the storm was making landfall. Winds reached 145 miles per hour. A massive storm surge, a wall of seawater, began pushing inland from the Gulf. The water rose 1 foot every 4 minutes. Streets flooded, then yards, then ground floors, then second floors. People climbed to their rooftops, clinging to chimneys in the darkness and the howling wind. Buildings began to collapse. The debris, broken timber, bricks, pieces of houses became a battering ram carried by the storm surge, smashing into everything in its path. Thousands of people were swept into the darkness of the Gulf of Mexico, never to be found. One survivor described it this way: "The roar of the wind and water was so deafening you could not hear the person next to you screaming." Galveston survivor account. September 8th, 1900. By the time the storm passed around midnight, half of Galveston was simply gone. 3,600 homes destroyed. The storm surge had reached 15 feet deep across the entire island. When the sun rose on September 9th, the people of Galveston emerged into a world that no longer existed. Where there had been neighborhoods, churches, and schools, there was now a mountain of debris 30 feet high and 2 miles long stretching across the entire island. The death toll is estimated between 8,000 and 12,000 people, roughly 25% of the entire city's population. It remains the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history to this day, surpassing even Hurricane Katrina. The bodies were so numerous that burial was impossible. Authorities loaded the dead onto barges and buried them at sea, but the Gulf washed them back to shore. In the end, the only option was to burn them. For weeks, funeral pyres burned day and night across the ruins of Galveston, Texas. The smell of smoke hung over the island for a month. What happened next is one of the most remarkable stories of human determination ever recorded. The people of Galveston did not abandon their city. They made a decision that stunned the engineering world. They were going to raise the entire island. First, they built a massive seawall, 17 feet high, 16 feet thick at its base, stretching for miles along the Gulf shore. Then they did something that had never been attempted on this scale. They pumped 16 million cubic yards of sand from the Gulf floor under the city, physically raising Galveston's elevation by up to 17 feet. Over 2,100 buildings were lifted on jacks while the sand was pumped beneath them. Even the city's magnificent St. Patrick's Church, a massive stone building, was lifted on hydraulic jacks and raised. The grade-raising project took 7 years to complete and remains one of the greatest engineering feats in American history. When a powerful hurricane hit Galveston again in 1915, the seawall held. Only 12 people died. The same storm on the same island, and 12 deaths instead of 12,000. The Galveston hurricane didn't just destroy a city, it fundamentally changed how America thinks about weather, disaster preparedness, and the power of nature. Before 1900, the U.S. Weather Bureau was underfunded, understaffed, and often ignored. After Galveston, the entire nation demanded better storm tracking, better warning systems, and better coastal protections. Every hurricane warning system that has ever saved your life traces its origins back to September 8, 1900. Galveston itself never fully recovered its former glory. Houston, sitting safely inland, eventually surpassed it as the economic powerhouse of Texas. But Galveston is still there, its seawall still stands, and every year tourists walk along that beach, the same beach where 8,000 people were swept away, not knowing they're walking on the graves of the most forgotten disaster in American history. The Great Galveston Hurricane is a story about human arrogance, the merciless power of nature, and the extraordinary courage it takes to rebuild when everything is gone. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of those 8,000 lives, hit subscribe so you never miss another chapter of American history. Drop a comment telling me which event you want next, and share this video, because these stories deserve to be remembered. Some places are built on history. Galveston is built on ghosts.